All right, all right, all right. Man, fellas. Oh, need some water bottle. Welcome back to another episode of That's an Awful Take. I'm your host with the most, Price Manser, here to make the most out of your day. Hope everyone has been well since the last time we've done an episode. It's been 8 months. So, first of all, sorry to say that. What up, Bimbo, in the chat? But, yeah, so, what's been going on, right? Where is, That's an Awful Take been? Well, life happened, I guess is what you can say. I graduated from college, got that degree, the vibes, got a job, doing real life stuff. So it's part of the reason why I just don't really have time. Bought a house, as you can see. This is the new setup. It's kind of empty right now. Probably why there might be some mad echo going on, but this is the new office, the streaming room. So yeah, we're gonna decorate it a little bit more to where there's a bit more going on. Some sports memorabilia, stuff like that. But we're so back. We got some great stuff to talk about today. If you guys haven't seen the title of the podcast episode today. We're talking about the national championship game, playoff kind of overview as well. Some basic portal stuff, just since, the portal changed, the whole time since the 8 months I haven't filmed a podcast episode, the portal has gone from, whenever kind of deal to a 1 month in January ordeal. So I'm excited to go over that. It kind of makes things easier for a guy like me who, has to comb through rosters of football and see these moves, see the high school players coming in, all that great stuff. So just really exciting things that are happening. I mean, the portal has changed college football a lot. I mean, we all know this. It's great. But yeah, I'm excited to get into all of that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let me go ahead and get us switched over to the monitor view real quick. What up, Liam? Welcome back to the pod, bro. We are so back. Yeah, bro. The room is, kind of popping off, right? I really like my white walls. I got a bunch of flags I could put up that are sitting in the corner of this room, but I just don't know where I'm going to put everything. But let's get into some ball, shall we? I haven't, talked ball on the podcast in a minute. So, the national championship, Miami and Indiana. I mean, wow. I mean, if you would have told me 8 months ago that Miami and Indiana were going to be in the national championship, I would have probably told you Miami. Yeah, I would agree with Miami. But Indiana making it in Curt Cignetti's second year is crazy. I remember talking about him losing to, I don't even remember who it was. Was it Penn State? I don't even remember. Maybe it was Tennessee. I don't remember who they lost to last year in the playoffs. But I remember talking about that, and then seeing how far he's come with this team. Obviously the moves they made in the portal were a lot. We remember seeing Fernando Mendoza. We remember seeing Roman Hemby going to Indiana and all that great stuff. In Miami, I remember at least talking about their defense. Miami finally addressed their defense in the portal this year. You saw that with guys like Zechariah Poyser coming in. And I think their defense is really kind of what helped carry them into this position right here, as we see, a 10 seed that barely got in over Notre Dame, which they should have been in over Notre Dame the whole year. A little more consistency from the College Football Playoff Committee would be nice, in my opinion. But as you can see here, they made it all the way. They put in the right team. So I'm happy to hear about that. But the Indiana Hoosiers, man, can we just take a second to talk about the Indiana Hoosiers? I mean, what a year. What up, Twiz? Welcome to the pod, man. I'm glad y'all could all pop in, man. Where you been? Living life, bro. Being employed and getting out of college, and then, trying to live the rest of my last summer of unemployment. So, pod got put on the back burner, but that didn't mean I didn't keep up with college football, because, I always do. What can I say? Bro, guys, chill. I didn't die. The rumor is Price Manser died. It's not true. Host of That's an Awful Take podcast. Anyways, back to it. Let's talk about the Indiana Hoosiers a little bit, right? To me, Kurt Signetti is not some highly, great high school recruiter. I mean, we've seen it from his time at James Madison. He's done a great job recruiting there, especially through the transfer portal. And then we see it with Indiana the past 2 years, bringing in Curtis Rourke last year. Just to name one person, that's all I could think of off the top of my head, to be honest. But, you bring in this year's class, you bring in, Fernando Mendoza. You bring in that whole James Madison defense pretty much, right? Especially on the defensive line. Those are guys that have been with Kurt Signetti for the past 3 or 4 years. And then, just a great job. I'm pretty sure, Roman Himby, I'm pretty sure Amari Cooper is also a transfer. Don't quote me on that. But the development, right? I mean, Indiana was a program that was kind of in the dumps, right? The last time you heard of Indiana, Michael Penix was their quarterback in 2019. So, and seeing that team from 2019 turn 7 years later completely around, first undefeated season in, playoff history, and to do it in 12 games, right? Can we discuss where Fernando falls on the autism spectrum? I mean, dude, his fixation is football, and it makes him a genius. That's all I'm saying. But, you bring in a guy like Fernando Mendoza, and here's the thing that, Fernando Mendoza is obviously, he's the Heisman winner, and, statistically as a quarterback, right, he's not the most flashy Heisman winner we've seen. I mean, we've been blessed with Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, guys like that where, I don't think Jalen Hurts won a Heisman. Don't listen to me on that. Travis Hunter. But guys who, fill up the stat sheet, guys who are scoring 40 touchdowns a year. Omar Cooper. Sorry, not Amari Cooper. But then you got this guy, little Fernando Mendoza, 3-year starter at Cal. And the guy is a football genius, right? And, Cal is a prestigious institution. And that's why I kind of have a soft spot for these quarterbacks that go to these institutions, these Stanfords, these Cals, these smarter schools where if they're really into football, they're a genius at it. Like Aaron Rodgers went to Cal, and he was an absolute genius on the football field. And I think it's fair to say that Mendoza kind of gets that same, treatment, right? Fernando Mendoza, he's a genius, doesn't use social media, the LinkedIn guy, goes to Indiana and is even enrolled in their business school, getting his MBA while playing, and winning the Heisman, going 16-0 for the first time in college football ever. But, I just love it for Mendoza, which is, I think, his mental ability and his ability to understand football, understand a defense, knowing where the ball goes on the field, which receiver is going to be open, going through reads. I think that Fernando Mendoza kind of sets himself above the rest of the quarterbacks in college football right now. And even in a very disappointing season when it comes to quarterbacks, right? People were hyping up guys like DJ Lagley, Arch Manning, Drew Aller, and just to name a couple guys that, and none of those guys really kind of turned out the way they were supposed to be, right? The media was portraying these guys as, the next coming of Joe Burrow and Kyler Murray and stuff like that, but you really didn't see it. And then you got a little more soft-spoken guys like Fernando Mendoza, Josh Hoover, Sawyer Robertson, Devin Dampier that have come out of nowhere almost, it seems. If you don't follow, like, the average person, the average college football watcher is not going to really know where these guys come from, right? Yeah, Levitt was booty too, I agree. But you see these guys come in out of nowhere. And I think, even Fernando Mendoza, like, you could tell at Cal just how much of a genius he is on the football field, right? And maybe Cal's record doesn't reflect that from his time there, but he was the only bright spot on that team. Him and Isaiah Hunter, especially, I think 2 years ago when, Fernando Mendoza was originally at Cal. I think those were, your two guys. That's the two people you could rely on in that offense at Cal, right? So, Josh Hoover going to ball at Indiana. Hey, I agree, Twiz. Listen, we're going to talk more about that later, but just know Josh Hoover is probably a top 3 favorite of my quarterbacks in the portal. I'll have a special quarterbacks episode for the guys in the portal. But just know Josh Hoover is top 3. But, it's just an insane season, and I think Mendoza is just a genius when it comes to playing football, right? So let's just actually get into the game for once. But yes, I swear some random was glazing Chambliss a year ago. Hey, some guy might have went on a minute-long tangent about how good Trinidad Chambliss was at Ferris State. And to watch out, because Austin Simmons could lose his job. Must have been a really bad take. Really awful take. Really. But anyways, let's get into the actual game itself, right? To me, this game is unstoppable force versus immovable object, right? Both teams play great football at a high level. And you could say what you want about Carson Beck. You could say what you want about, whoever is, the shortfalls of these teams. But they play great football. They minimize their errors to an extent. We'll talk about that later. But, these are two teams with great defenses. Obviously, you know how Miami's defense is. Reuben Bain Jr., you got Akeem Mesidor on the other side. Great edge rushers, right? And then you got a secondary that has a ton of great guys like, what's his name? What's his name? Jacoby Thomas, Zechariah Poyser, Xavier Lucas, or is it Xavier? I don't remember. Yeah, Xavier Lucas, right? You got a really great secondary there in Miami, and the edge rushers are, amazing at their job. Reuben Bain Jr. is probably going to be a top 5 pick in this draft. And then Wesley Bizante, I don't know how to say his name. Great linebacker. Ahmad Moten Sr., another great defensive lineman, and the main defensive lineman that Miami would run on this defense. And it worked, right? Miami was great at getting to the quarterback. Miami created the most pressures Indiana saw this college football playoff. And I think for the whole season, in fact. And, that is truly like a testament to how good these Miami football players are, right? So, even Sonny Styles at Ohio State and that Ohio State daunted defense with Matt Patricia at the helm couldn't create more pressure than the Miami defense. But I think a lot of their shortcomings with how Miami plays is with their offense, right? So their offense works, and a lot of people kind of get mad at it, right? Because you hand it off down their throats with Mark Fletcher, and then you throw it to Malachi Toney for a screen pass, and he's open, and it's a touchdown, right? But you look at the offense, and it worked. Maybe it wasn't the most ethical, I guess you could say. Like, you're not slinging the ball down the field, really. And occasionally they would do that, but it's Malachi Toney getting an open space. That's why you run the football with Mark Fletcher and Gerard Pringle and Drummer Brown. You want to get, established to run to throw the pass. And I think, honestly, the Indiana Hoosiers kind of play the same way. I think the unsung heroes of this Indiana offense are their running back duo. Both over 1,000 yards, over 7 touchdowns apiece. Not Brown. Kalen Black and Roman Hemby, which, we talked about Roman Hemby 8 months ago, right? Going to Indiana, and I love the move. But, both of these guys amassed over 1,000 yards. Black was the guy on the goal line. He did a great job. And Hemby was the main runner. And they both ate. And I think really what both of these teams did was establish the run to then throw the pass, right? Get defenses loading the box, get your guys one-on-one. That's what happens, right? You get your guys one-on-one, a screen situation for Miami, throw a screen to Malachi Toney, get your offensive lineman in space. You get big plays. And, even having one-on-one with Keelan Marion, for instance, is the same thing. And to Indiana's credit, you get these guys loading the box, and then you have guys like Elijah Surratt, a big body receiver, Charlie Becker, a big body receiver, that can go out and make plays against DBs in one-on-one coverage. And then, Omar Cooper for Indiana as well. The slot speedster kind of guy that can do everything else in between. More of the screen pass, more of the mesh route concept kind of guy, right? So I think both of these teams, honestly, offensively, play close to the same football, right? And, I think it comes back to, whose quarterback won the Heisman? Well, Indiana, Fernando Mendoza won the Heisman. And I think, that's kind of what separates Indiana from Miami in this aspect, right? We did a Jackson collab episode. Yes, Jackson, if you hear me, come on to the pod, bro. Let's talk college ball, please. But, and then to Miami's defense, or not Miami, sorry, to Indiana's defense, you got D'Angelo Pons, who was one of my favorite corners going into this year. Obviously I don't think I have anything recorded of me saying that, but I believed it. And then, that whole defensive line, even through the injuries, a lot of guys brought in from James Madison that have been developing under Curt Cignetti for so long, get to this position, and then they ball out. It's a great defensive line. You got great safeties, great corners, right? So, it's no wonder that, both of these teams complemented each other so well. And that's why I think that it was like this game was kind of a tale of two halves, right? The first half, Indiana was pretty dominant, I feel like. Indiana was, I think, 17-3 at the half, or 10-0, 10-0 at half. And Indiana kind of, they had these long, drawn-out drives, right? They had it where, they were taking 6 minutes, running 14 plays, converting on 3rd and 4th down. It was great. And then in the second half, Miami, I think, kind of honestly played better in terms of the whole experience of the second half. But, they scored 21 points. They outscored Indiana in the second half, right? And they did I think Miami kind of, the momentum swayed. Miami's defense stepped up, right? Miami's defense, I think until the fourth quarter, they only, Indiana was 0 for 5 on 3rd down. And it's just a tale of two halves, I mean, we saw Indiana dominating, running the football. We saw Miami doing the same thing, converting on 3rd and 4th down. And I think the offenses, were able to string drives together that were pretty heartbreaking, especially on Indiana's side, right? And I think to summarize, to the end of this game, it was Miami not being able to do enough, which is kind of funny saying it now as a guy who has hyped up Miami the past 2 years and has been, kind of in their corner in a way, where I see the vision and I see what they're trying to do and I kind of believe it, right? And I believed in Carson Beck, and maybe I shouldn't have. But what I see it, Miami wasn't able to do enough. Indiana was, right? Curt Cignetti let his nuts hang. I mean, that was the best 4th down conversion I've seen in a long time. Probably back to Jalen Milroe 4th down against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, right? Except the stakes are way higher. 4th and 5 on the 10-yard line, and you're calling QB draw? I mean, that is ridiculous. I would never call that play. I'm not calling that play in my CFB dynasty. Shoot, if I was doing anything in football, I probably wouldn't call that play, but they did. And it was probably the run of the season, probably the best touchdown of the season in terms of stakes, in terms of what it meant to a program, in terms of what it meant to a player. But I mean, it was the most let your nuts hang play of this playoff. And the fact, you have Heisman Mendoza, running through guys, getting to the end zone. I mean, I think that's really a play that encapsulates Indiana football as a season, right? Is battling through adversity. A lot of people didn't believe in Indiana. And those same people did, obviously now. But when they got eliminated from the playoffs in the first round, they were like, why is Indiana here in the first place? They didn't see the vision, right? But, it's the ultimate let your nuts hang moment by Curt Cignetti, and I got to give all the credit to him, right? And I think even then, you look at this win probability over here, which in my opinion is kind of ridiculous, right? Miami was stringing together drives, and they had a chance to win this game. Even after that touchdown, they still had a chance to win this game. But, it's in the last second that you see Carson Beck become Carson Beck. And maybe, I was a Carson Beck hype believer, right? I mean, it's hard when you see him statistically, what he puts up, and you see him in the games where they win. He's playing great football, in my opinion. But the games they lose, right? It's a little tough, and it's hard because Carson Beck is a guy who has had 40 career starts throughout his college football career and has only lost 6 games. But you look at it, those four games of those 6 were decided by an interception thrown by Carson Beck. And, the only thing I can think of, as a Georgia fan myself, is when Carson Beck dropped back to throw that pass with 30 seconds left in the game, I just get a flashback to that Alabama game. The underthrown ball to Colby Young in the end zone. It's the same exact kind of ordeal. It's not the same exact play, but, my mind instantly flashed it back. And we saw it against Pitt in overtime. We saw it against LSU. Or not LSU, sorry. Against Louisville this season, right? So it's kind of like, maybe what you see is what you get with Carson Beck. You have a great quarterback in terms of, throwing the ball well and getting it to an open receiver from time to time. But those deep balls, his arm talent is just not where it should be as a great college quarterback, right? And in those moments where, your guys are supposed to be, pressure makes diamonds, right? Pressure's not making diamonds. Pressure is making coal. And we don't want coal, and the scouts. The scouts don't want coal. They don't want to overthrow a goal or underthrow a goal ball. I mean, even then, regardless of the underthrow or not, I think that ball is getting at least deflected. But it's just hard to see, with a guy like Carson Beck, a guy I've believed in. And, when he left Georgia, I didn't hate on it, right? I thought, this is what's best for him, in my opinion, is getting out of Georgia. And to me, I still believe that sentiment, that it's what was best for him. I mean, look at him. He went to the national championship, and he was a touchdown away. But, congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers. Obviously we'll get into what Miami's doing in terms of the portal a little bit, sorry. But, late game situations, the pressure gets to him. His flaws start to show. Inconsistencies with throwing the ball, arm talent, stuff like that. We saw it at Georgia a little bit. We saw it at Miami this season. So I got to give Indiana their credit. But, both of these teams were playing elite football. And I think Miami especially catered to Carson Beck's strengths and the strengths of their team. And I don't think you should put them down for that, right? Both of these teams did that. One just won. Am I right? But anyways, that was, the college football playoff final, Natty. So what a game. I had Georgia to win it, but a little bit biased there, but I loved it either way. This has probably been, out of the 2 college football playoffs, it's definitely been my favorite. Just because watching Penn State and Notre Dame last year was just not fun, in my opinion. No offense, but I don't like the way those 2 teams play ball. Anyways, let's talk about the transfer portal. I think his Beck, that's a statistic I was saying. His Beck has lost 6 games in his career, and he lost 4 of them. Yep, exactly. That is the truth, right? That is what has happened, and what we have seen time and time again. And I think scouts, especially in the NFL, will notice that. And I feel like in the NFL, teams want a quarterback who has that it factor. I would say Fernando Mendoza has that it factor. Guys like, Drake May has that it factor. Guys that you watch play the game, Josh Allen, where you're like, they want to win it. But then they choke it in the last possible moment. Josh Allen may be controversial on that one, but, I'll save that for another day, right? But let's get into the transfer portal, shall we? This is probably my favorite part of college football. I'm not going to lie to y'all. Maybe that's not very, that's not a majority kind of people feel that way. But I love the transfer portal. I think it's great that we get to see players leave teams when they're not being used correctly, or if they're not being used at all. Yes, it's a little crazy and there's a lot going on. And, of course, the nitty-gritty is dirty. We know this. The tampering and, schools contacting early, which is tampering, but you know what I mean. It's a little dirty in the nitty-gritty, but I think what the transfer portal, when it comes down to its true intentions, it's to be able to leave a team that either you're not believing in or you're not, being used correctly, you're not being used at all. And going to, I think a lot of people misunderstand how this should work, and there's a lot of falsehoods associated, these are kids that are 18 and 22 years old for the most part. And, they're not being advised correctly. You could slap agent in your Twitter bio and you're an agent. Boom. You can advise these students, these kids, teenagers. I think that's a little ridiculous. Obviously, there's some kinks that need to be worked out, but that's why you get some crazy, dumb moves. Like guys that should be playing football that aren't. I'm trying to, pull up one, but I'm not going to find one right here. But guys that should be playing football, but they're not because their agent tells them to go be third string at Florida when they can be first string at FAU, right? But let's get into the portal. Let's talk about. We're just going to do a basic overview tonight, just the top, guys really. I'm not going to go too in depth on what I think, just because I want to save it for individual episodes of the position. So we'll go over pretty much the top guys and go from there, right? So the number one guy, and this is all according to 24/7 Sports, this is not my own ranking. When I go from position to position, I'll base the conversation off my own ranking, right? Because I'm not going to have Sam Levitt at 1 like most people. I'm probably going to have, Josh Hoover or Colton Joseph in my, those are two of my top 3s, right? Anyway, Sam Levitt, he goes to LSU. I mean, this was pretty much a given since he entered the portal, or when he was believed to enter the portal back in December. Lane Kiffin, he gets in he joins LSU. He needs a quarterback. Obviously, Nussmeier's gone. Van Buren hit the portal. So he gets Sam Levitt, who's supposedly the best quarterback in the portal. And, I like the move a lot. I'm very curious to see what, LSU receivers come in and, ball out, right? And I'm very curious. I have a very, and you look at a Lane Kiffin offense, you look at, Trinidad Chambliss, Jackson Dart, Matt Corral, guys like that, and they were good. So I'm sure Sam Levitt will be able to replicate some of those things, right? So it's not at all a bad pick at all. It's, I think it'll just be, it'll be good. It'll work out for sure. Like, there's no doubt about it. Next, you get Brendan Sorsby out of Cincinnati, goes to Texas Tech. So I do like this move a lot. Is he worth the money? That's a good question. I'm very curious to see how he plays with true talent around him. Like Cincinnati, your talent's pretty capped at Cincinnati, Yes, they're a recent Power 4 team, but, they were just in the group of 5 4 years ago, right? So I'm just curious to see how he can perform with a true roster at Texas Tech, who spends millions of dollars on wide receivers and whatnot. So I'm very curious to see how good Brendan Sorsby can play, and if, maybe I need to watch more Brendan Sorsby, because, statistically, he looks great. Every game I've watched of Brendan Sorsby, he's been, a good quarterback. But I think a lot of this hype is overblown, in my opinion, and especially with our next guy we're going to talk about, I see that a lot, which is Drew Mestemaker, which I like Drew Mestemaker. You got to love the Drew Mestemaker story. Came out of high school, never starting a game at his high school, gets a walk-on offer at North Texas with Eric Morris, and then plays in a bowl game and balls out. And he's made elite throws. And he fills up the stat sheet immensely, right? But is that more of the offense, or is that more of Drew Mestemaker's true talent? We see it all the time in college football, I feel like, with guys who are go to the NFL, for instance, and are just not that great. Like Case Keenum, for instance. He lit up the stat sheet like crazy. Dylan Gabriel. Also in that same boat where they light up the stat sheet like crazy, but in the NFL, don't prove themselves right. And the biggest worry for me with an Eric Morris led team at Oklahoma State is, how does that fare in a Big 12 schedule? The offense, I think, is certified, right? You get Caleb Hawkins, you get Drew Mestemaker, you get the receiver, I forget his name, he's probably somewhere in here. But how is that going to pan out in a true Big 12 schedule. And that's not to knock down Eric Morris's offense, because Eric Morris's offense was great. It was one of the best in college football when it came to airing the ball out and even running it with Caleb Hawkins, right? But how does that fare against teams like Arizona? How does that fare against teams like teams like, TCU, Baylor? How is that same offense going to work at a much faster pace of football? And I guess we'll have to see how that goes. And that's why I'm cautious about Drew Mestemaker. I don't think he's going to be some, get to the Power 4 and suck. Not in Eric Morris's offense. But I'm very curious to see. I don't know if their success is going to translate. I don't think they're going to win 10 games. They might win 6. It's just going to be hard to tell. Next, Jordan Seaton, late addition to the portal, has visited 4 schools so far: Mississippi State, which is kind of out of nowhere, LSU, Oregon, Miami. He's been in LSU with Lane Kiffin, private dinners, stuff like that. And LSU tried to extend their visit so that he couldn't make his visit in Eugene, Oregon with Dan Lanning and company up there. Going to be very interesting to see where he goes. Seaton is obviously the best tackle probably in college football right now. And he's only a sophomore or junior. And he's going to be great wherever he goes. And we'll definitely start right away. But I'm very curious to see what school it is, right? I think right now you could say LSU is the favorite to land him. But, I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon or Miami makes a run, right? Next, you got Princewell Umanulane, which comes from controversy on this one, just because the NIL payments were leaked of Ole Miss's NIL budget and who was getting money and who wasn't getting enough money. So I think Princewell getting in the portal is just because of that, right? If I was his head coach to LSU, not really surprised whatsoever, and honestly, kind of surprising. In my opinion, just because of how he left. You're a defensive player. Lane Kiffin is an offensive coach. I feel like you should have closer ties with your defensive coordinator. But, hey, what do I know? Next is Cam Coleman, Texas. Texas is loading up in this portal cycle, right? They get rid of Livingstone, but I'd take Cam Coleman over Livingstone 7 days a week. And then you get 2 elite running backs in Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers, both 1,000-yard rushers this season, and double-digit touchdowns for both of those guys. And you got yourself a nasty running back duo and a nasty receiving corps with Cam Coleman at the helm. And all you have to see is Arch Manning in the defense, right? Arch Manning playing decent football, right? And there was a time where I feel like it fluctuated, right? Arch Manning was overrated. Then towards the end of the year, maybe he was underrated even a little bit. But now it's back, I feel like, where, we're getting into that Texas hype era where Texas hypes up their guys like crazy. Arch Manning, the jump is coming. But I'm going to hold my tongue in terms of Arch Manning making a jump. We haven't seen it yet, in my opinion. Yes, he was better this year than he was last year, but, we got to see more. In my opinion, I'm not ready to give it to him yet. Next, we got Chaz Coleman going to Tennessee. What a huge get for the Tennessee Volunteer defense, right? And this is a Tennessee Volunteer defense I think lost Boot Carter, and lost a lot of guys, especially on the offensive side. No more Joey Aguilar. I think Chris Brazzell goes to the draft, right? Star Thomas is gone. So this is a Tennessee team that I feel like is kind of stuck in purgatory almost right now, right? I don't know what to make of them because they've gotten some good pickups, but I don't know if that outweighs who they lost, right? So I guess we'll have to see that. Next, Damon Wilson II goes to Miami. Wow, I love the Damon Wilson pickup, originally from Georgia. Played great there. Played great at Missouri. I think he recorded 8 sacks and then goes to this Miami defense to replace Reuben Bain Jr. or Akeem Mesidor, right? So a great pickup. James Smith out of Alabama wrote starting defensive lineman towards the end of the year. He might have started all games, but more of that O-line controller kind of guy, right? Where he controls the offensive line, right? He's not going to fill up the stat sheet in any way, but he's going to make his presence known. Same way with Mateen Ibarok, Ibaropa from Wake Forest. This is a guy originally committed to Georgetown. Played at Georgetown, then transferred to Wake Forest, and then to Texas Tech. Texas Tech got all the money, so I don't blame him for going there. Probably will be a nice piece for that defensive line, both of them, right? Next, Isaiah Horton from Alabama to Texas A&M. Honestly, Isaiah Horton was great at Miami. I'm not going to forget about that, right? I mean, he did. I think he was a 1,000-yard receiver. 6'4", 208, the size. He's a mismatch. But Alabama, he really wasn't used to his full potential, in my opinion. And maybe, Jeremy Bernard was used a ton, familiar with the coaching staff and Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer coached Jeremy Bernard at Washington. And I think before DeBoer was even at Washington, he was wherever DeBoer was before. But, Horton gets out, Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard were doing the dang thing over there. But Isaiah Horton hops in the portal, goes to Texas A&M to be that big body receiver in that Texas A&M receiving room that I feel like was kind of lacking. So it's a great move in terms of I think Isaiah Horton will get more normal production to what he had at Miami, but it just depends how Marcel Reed can throw the ball, right? We saw Marcel Reed was lighting it up at some points, and some points he was crapping his pants. If we're being real, I mean, especially towards the end of the year. But overall, I think it's a great move for Horton. Next, Coy Parrish goes to Oregon. This is very similar to the Dylan Tiedemann move from last year. Coy Parrish is a great safety, probably one of the best in this class, and he goes to Oregon. So, I don't really have to say much. He's going to play great, especially I think Dylan Tiedemann declared, so just filling in right where he was. Great move. Next is Amarion Miller. I don't know how Amarion Miller is the 13th best player in the transfer portal this year, because he surely doesn't deserve to be, in my opinion. And that's not a knock on how he plays or anything. And, quarterback wasn't, the greatest thing, right, for Colorado last year. So maybe I'm wrong and I'll eat my words. But even then, going to Arizona State with Cutter Boley, I like Cutter Boley, don't get me wrong. But how much can you believe in Cutter Boley to lead an offense? Especially in the Big 12 right now. The Big 12 is very competitive. I don't know how good Amarion Miller will be at Arizona State. Next is DJ Lagway at Baylor. I was never a DJ Lagway fan from the second he started to now to when he last year or whatever. I just don't believe in him. And maybe a step down in competition is what he needs. And Baylor, is that team that's maybe a step down. Maybe he goes to Duke, right? But even then, I just don't know if I can believe in DJ Lagway. It's been 1.5 years, I feel like, of seeing him play and not seeing him play good. So I just don't know if I can believe in him still, right? And maybe he goes to Baylor and he plays lights out. But I just don't foresee that happening. Especially with the offense Baylor has. They're not a team that's going to, last year they threw the ball like crazy with Sawyer Robertson and also ran it like crazy. But I just don't think DJ Lagway has the same quarterbackiness as Sawyer Robertson. And, I just don't think he has the arm or the read. He doesn't make the right reads. He throws a lot of interceptions. Sawyer Robertson didn't do that. Next is Dylan Raiola, who went to Oregon from Nebraska. Mr. Changes teams all the time himself, going to ride the bench behind Dante Moore next year. Dante Moore is a great quarterback. Don't let recency bias fool you. Dante Moore was great, and I like his idea to stay in college. I continually said that he should stay in college. He needs to, but I like Dante Moore and Dante Moore to lead Oregon's offense, and maybe Dylan Raiola learns a lot under Dan Lanning and company down there at Oregon, but I just don't see him seeing the field really, especially a guy who's preparing to, a guy who needs to have a great season to go to the NFL draft in Dante Moore. I just don't see him seeing the field, right? That's a crazy way to compare. Yeah, that was kind of a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen debate of me to say quarterbacky like that. Next is Reed Harris going to Arizona State as well. They're getting names, right? Arizona State is getting names. They're doing a good job at it, right? But Reed Harris at Boston College, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe Reed Harris is a great wide receiver, but do I believe in Reed Harris as a wide receiver in this Arizona State offense with Cutter Boley at the helm? I don't know. I don't know what to make of this move. And I think it's honestly pretty lateral in terms of what he'd get at Boston College compared to what he'd get at Arizona State. Next is Tion Gray, committed to Notre Dame. And guys, don't look now, but Notre Dame has been killing it in the portal. I will say I hate Notre Dame. I'm a Notre Dame hater. The biggest hater of Notre Dame in Notre Dame history. But they're kind of doing really well in the portal. And this is one of those moves that I really like a lot, right? Next, Darian Mensah. Given this whole situation, I mean, is he going to be in the portal? Is he not? I have zero clue. And if he does and he goes to Miami, I mean, that's great. I'm very curious to see, Cooper Barkate is also expected to go to Miami with Mensah if it does happen. And if you don't watch Cooper Barkate or watch a Duke game, Cooper Barkate is him. Harvard transfer, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. That kind of deep threat, middle of the field guy that Keelan Marion played this year is what Cooper Barkate will be. And Darian Mensah is by far a better quarterback than Carson Beck. I think that's not ridiculous to say. But in hindsight, at least, if you would have asked me this question 8 months ago, I probably would have told you Carson Beck. But I do like the move from Miami, obviously. What's not to like? It's a little fishy, though, and it's messy. And that's why I'm just not going to talk about it right now till the dust settles, right? Just because it is a mess. And I just don't get why we have the courts involved in college football. And people signing bad deals because they got shitty agents. Sorry, excuse my language, but just shouldn't happen. J.J. Buchanan follows his head coach to Michigan. This is a great pickup for Michigan, who loved to use tight ends before. Don't know if that same offensive mindset is going to follow them to Michigan or is going to stay there with, the name redacted head coach being fired. We'll have to see. DeAndre Moore Jr. is one of my favorite wide receivers in the portal right now. He is great. And he didn't get on the field a lot at Texas. But my goodness, can he move? Well, let me rephrase that. He did get on the field a lot at Texas. He was, I think, their second leading receiver. That was just a total lie I just told you guys. But DeAndre Moore was on the field a lot at Texas, and he was great. He played elite football, and now goes to Colorado. This is probably Colorado's best get in the portal since, Travis Hunter. I'm going to be real with y'all. This is a great move. And if Julian Lewis can throw the football, Colorado is going to win games. That's all I'm saying. If Julian Lewis can play football well, Colorado will win football games. Hassan Longstreet goes to LSU to be the backup. Kind of, I think, a long-term guy for Lane Kiffin to hold on to. I will have to see how he passes the ball and all that good stuff. So I just don't know much about Longstreet yet. Deuce Knight goes to Ole Miss, goes back home to Oxford, Mississippi. I like the move a lot, especially if Trinidad can't come back. I think Deuce Knight is a guy who is ready kind of to take that job. At Auburn, he looked great. I mean, granted, it was Mercer. But, he ran for 200 yards. He's going to run all over the place on you, and he can throw the ball. And he's got great size. He's got great pocket presence, right? And he knows when to get out, and he's fast. So I do like Deuce Knight a lot. I think he has all the intangibles to be a great quarterback. We just got to see it going. Caleb Hawkins, we already mentioned it a little bit. Probably was the best freshman running back this year. Goes to Oklahoma State, follows Eric Morris and the rest of the team down there to Oklahoma State. Next, Byron Brown goes from USF, follows his coach, Alex Golesh, to Auburn. We'll have to see what this brings. I like Byron Brown as a quarterback. I love him. 3,000 passing yards, 1,000 rushing yards, was a great quarterback. Probably a top 10 in the country, if you ask me. Maybe that's ridiculous to say, but he looks like him. But will that translate to the SEC? Alex Golesh is bringing a lot of guys in at USF, or from USF. And that's what alarms me about Auburn this year, or for next year. Bringing in your American Conference players is great and all, but bringing them to the SEC to win, try and I just don't think it works out. And Byron Brown will probably put the team on his back. And I'll be happy to see that, right? But I just don't know how well he can play with SEC. And maybe I don't need to harp on the SEC so much, given what's happened in this playoff. But I just don't know how well Auburn can be fielding players from USF. That's all I'm saying. Next, we got Carius Kern. I don't know. Does the reverse. Leaves LSU and goes to Ole Miss. Probably just in spite of Lane Kiffin himself. I don't really know much about the guy, to be honest. So I'm not going to say much. A lot of the tackles and offensive linemen, I really don't know much. Or Darrell Gill Jr. I don't know much about him. I'm not going to sit here and lie to y'all. But Alabama going ahead and getting some guys, some defensive linemen replacements to replace James Smith from earlier that we talked about. Great pickups from Oregon and USC. USC's defensive line last year was very underrated in my opinion. So I do like the idea. You could see Kalen DeBoer's Western roots coming into effect here and getting guys in former Pac-12 teams to come to his team. And I like it. I think that is good. Alabama struggled in the trenches a lot this year, so I'm glad they're addressing it. It's not flashy moves, but I think at the skill position players, Alabama has whatever you want, right? So I love that he's working on the trenches. It's boring, but it's needed, right? Next, Isaiah Canyon, whatever, to Georgia, leaving Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech fans salty as hell about it. I hate Georgia Tech. The window's closed, guys. It ain't going to happen, even with Alberto Mendoza. It ain't going to happen, guys. And Justice Haynes is a great running back. And, I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the conversation for maybe not the Heisman, but the best running back in college football for a while because he's that great. And he carried Michigan last year, in my opinion. Yeah, you heard me. But Canyon was one of the best receivers for Georgia Tech. Kind of really came out of nowhere, in my opinion. You look at who Georgia Tech kept, or not kept, but got in the portal last year. Eric Rivers, guys like, I forgot the other one, but guys who didn't really play much. Next, Eric Singleton Jr. goes to Florida to reunite with his offensive coordinator from Georgia Tech. Auburn did not use Eric Singleton Jr. correct, and that's why you see this dip in statistics. They didn't use him correct, and Jackson Arnold also couldn't throw the ball. I mean, Ashton Daniels was their best quarterback this year. So I can see, that's kind of why. But, he goes back to that offense that he ran at Georgia Tech. You go to Florida. You get Aaron Philo. You get Eric Singleton Jr. I like a lot. Even that duo. You have Jaden Ball to carry the load on the ground. Florida might be a sneaky good team next year, especially in the right offense. If, and obviously Haynes King at the helm of the Georgia Tech offense was really the facilitator, right? But if you can get maybe 75% of that from Aaron Philo, I don't hate it. And I think Florida is a team that can make noise, which I hate to say as a Georgia fan. I hate to say it, but Florida could make noise this year. And I like John Summerall as a head coach. I like, if I forget his name, but the Georgia Tech offensive coordinator, I like him calling plays. It's going to be dangerous. Next, we got Nick Marsh. My favorite wide receiver in the portal this year goes to Indiana. Kurt Cignetti just reloads. And, I mean, that's the kind of talent you see from or at least in terms of retaining and bringing in players, that's the kind of talent you see from elite head coaches. And Kurt Cignetti, has already, cemented himself as that, obviously. But, especially reloading. Went 16-0, and while he's playing the playoffs, he's bringing in Nick Marsh and Josh Hoover. It's just an elite pickup. Nick Marsh, I don't really need to say much. 6'3", 203. Great wide receiver. And with Josh Hoover throwing him the ball, it's going to be nasty. They're going to fill up the stat sheet. Rocco Beck follows his head coach Matt Campbell to Penn State. A lot of pretty much the whole Iowa State starting offense and defense goes to Penn State. And, I don't think this is ridiculous to say, and maybe it is, but yes, Penn State lost a lot. But what they brought in my opinion, is almost equivalent or better. I mean, maybe that's ridiculous. Maybe it's ridiculous, but I believe it. I fully believe it. I mean, maybe it's not, I'm not going to compare it to Kurt Cignetti success, but you bring in guys you've played with or guys you've coached for 3 or 4 years now to come join you at a elite level program. They're going to make some noise. And the schedule for Penn State is easy next year. They're going to make some noise. Don't be surprised, honestly. Next, Luke Reynolds, wannabe Tyler Warren, goes to Virginia Tech, follows James Franklin. A lot of the Penn State players do. Amaris Williams, the star defensive tackle or the edge rusher for Auburn, goes to Georgia. What an amazing pickup for the Dogs. I think he'll make an instant impact. And Georgia, I think what really hurt them this past season was getting guys off the edge that can finish. Pause. But that really hurt them this year, especially early on, right? I don't think, you think about the 2021 and 2022 championship runs, Georgia's defense generated so much pressure that it made it impossible for teams to win, except for Alabama. But the past 3 years, you haven't seen that from Georgia at all. You haven't seen, and maybe that's because that defense was generational. But we'll have to see. But I think Amaris Williams is definitely a step in the right direction. Next, you got Toby Asunsanmi from Kansas State, another great pickup. Didn't really make a lot of noise at Kansas State last year, but I think is a solid, even if he's a rotational piece, right? He's going to be great. Hollywood Smothers, we already talked about a little bit. Hollywood Smothers, one of my favorite running backs in this portal class, is great. I bet on Hollywood Smothers a lot this year, and he always hit. Maybe the other people in the parlay didn't hit, but Hollywood Smothers usually always did. And he would carry that NC State offense. And I'm Texas, that's a great pickup. That's an amazing pickup. Next, we got Terrell Anderson. I don't know much about Terrell Anderson, and I know I just talked about how Hollywood Smothers carried the NC State offense, so maybe that's why you don't really hear much about Terrell Anderson going to USC. Ty Benefield, great safety, by the way, for Boise State. I mean, nobody watched Boise State football after they got blown out by USF in week 1 of the college football season. But Ty Benefield is great. And he's going to go to LSU, and he's going to start. He's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Benjamin Brommer, great tight end. I love him. 6'7", 255 pounds. He's a great tight end. And Matt Campbell knows how to use his tight ends. Trust me. Great move. We're probably going to go till we get to 50 players deep, and then we're going to go ahead and end it because I'm hungry. Jacarius Peak, great offensive tackle for NC State. Really was one of the driving forces to help Hollywood Smothers do what he did on the ground. So Jacarius Peak, great move to South Carolina. You get maybe a blindside guy for Lenore Sellers. We need that, right? Xavier Gilliam follows fellow teammate. Hold on. I know his name. Chaz Coleman. Tennessee. Love it. Great pickup by the Tennessee defense. Just don't know if it outweighs what they lost between graduation and the portal, right? Colton Price. Hey, great name. Interior offensive lineman goes to Kentucky. Kentucky has a very interesting team this year. And when we do our team breakdowns throughout the offseason, Kentucky is going to be one of those teams where I'm like, this might be the unction. I don't know what to make of Kentucky. I like C.J. Baxter, but C.J. Baxter is never healthy. So it's going to be interesting to see. Kentucky is a team that could make noise, but is a team that could also be butt. So I'm very curious to see. Quincy Porter goes to Notre Dame. Former, I think, 5-star recruit out of high school goes to Notre Dame. That's a great pickup for C.J. Carr. C.J. Carr might win an MVP or a Heisman. Who knows? We'll have to see. I just don't like Notre Dame. But a great move nonetheless by Notre Dame. I mean, insane. Josh Hoover. JT said it. Twiz said it. He said, Josh Hoover could win the Heisman. And I believe it. I see it. Hoover is great. Hoover can air out the football. Now, does he have the decision-making or the IQ of a guy like Fernando Mendoza? No. But he is going to fill the stat sheet. You best believe it. Throwing in a Nick Marsh, it's going to be dangerous. It's going to be very dangerous. Indiana football, I mean, they might have to change their offense a little bit, right? I don't know if they have someone who can fill up, who can be a run-first kind of guy right now. But we'll see. Ricky Gibson III transfers from Tennessee to Texas A&M. This is kind of what I was talking about with Tennessee's defense, losing guys and them going different schools to the NFL draft, stuff like that. And this is a great pickup by Texas A&M. That Tennessee secondary was very good. And it took a lot for even a team like Georgia to beat them, right? So a great pickup by Texas A&M, right? Jontez Williams, Iowa State guy, does not follow Matt Campbell and goes to USC. This is another great get. Jontez Williams was a great corner. You'll see that Matt Campbell every year kind of produces a guy like, Jarian Porter, for instance, for a couple years ago, or last year, was great for Iowa State. And Jontez Williams is just the next guy up. And you'll see this a lot with Matt Campbell. He does a great job. Austin Simmons goes to Missouri. Austin Simmons was a guy I really wasn't high on, starting, the season. And maybe, I didn't really talk about it on here, but, I talked that I just didn't believe in Austin Simmons. When I was, glucking Trinidad Chambliss 8 months ago, I was like, this is a guy that could take his job. And that's what happened, right? And Austin Simmons is still a decent quarterback, right? He has a great arm. I mean, he burnt my team. But I just don't think, Ole Miss fans were happy with it at all, especially to start the year. I don't know if I'm happy with it. I just don't believe it. We'll have to see what Elijah Drinkwitz does with him at Missouri, who he's going to be throwing to, for instance, because Missouri, I think, is another one of those teams that I don't know where to go with them. They're kind of in purgatory. I don't think they have the roster to make a run, but I don't think they're going to be that bad either. Going to be a tough tell. Next, Ethan Grunkmeyer, and I guess lastly, Ethan Grunkmeyer came in for the injured Drew Aller last year. Played pretty well, I feel like it's kind of easy to play decent in a Penn State offense. I mean, Drew Aller was the quarterback, and they still were winning 10 games, right? So Ethan Grunkmeyer follows old James Franklin to Virginia Tech. I like the move, just following your head coach. I mean, he's going to probably start at Virginia Tech. Will he be good in an ACC schedule? Probably. Will he light up and be some wizard? I don't think so. But guys, that's going to do it for us from our first episode back. Man, I mean, what a pleasure to be back. Thank you guys for coming on in, chatting with me, saying, keeping the conversation alive, listening to me yap about college football. I love it. I appreciate it. It's awesome. I love it. It's great. But, I have a lot of great things planned. Let me give you guys a little breakdown for the future, probably, right? So in the future, plans are, we're going to do positional breakdowns. So QB, RB, wide receiver, tight end, O-line, D-line, safeties, linebackers, corners, all that great stuff. Then, before we do that, probably, or maybe after, I don't know. We're going to do winners and losers, right? Top 10 winners of the portal team-wise, top 10 losers of the portal team-wise. And as we get real deep into the offseason, it's only January. The college football, the national championship was like 4 days ago. As we get deeper into the offseason, I'll get more into a team-by-team conference, probably go conference-by-conference episodes on, who I like on what team, what transfers, who I think will have some sort of boom or bust season, how I rank them, who I think will win the conference, who I think will lose the conference, who's going to be up, who's going to be down. And just basic stuff like that will help us get through this offseason. It's going to be a deep one. It's going to be a long one. That's what she said. Pause. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to be back. I think, at first it was more of a focusing on all sports, but that was really hard to do. And with my limited time I have now working and stuff, I think it would be a lot better if I just focused on college football and NFL, which is what I'm best at. So, of course, we're going to still talk about NFL, especially the draft. And that's another point is when the draft comes up. Obviously, just like last year, we'll do my draft grades and we'll do a draft show. So, maybe we'll have some special guests for the draft show, hopefully, just like last time. That was a lot of fun. But, guys, I appreciate you guys for coming in. I missed it. I'm glad to be back running it up. This is great. I love it. But I'll see you guys later. Next Thursday, 8 p.m. Be there.